My involvement with the environmental Nakba publication is, it was published by Friends of the Earth International. I was invited to be part of an observer mission to Palestine in 2012. Friends of the Earth International wanted to have some people to investigate what was happening in the West Bank as a result of the Israeli colonization of the West Bank. And we were hosted by Pengon, the Friends of the Earth Palestine. And we observed and witnessed a number of areas where the Israeli occupation was actually damaging the environment, and not just damaging the environment, but using the damage of the environment as a means of ethnic cleansing, as a means of pursuing the Nakba, continuing the Nakba into the 21st century.
Israeli occupation of Palestine manifests itself in killing people, taking over the land and destroying the ecosystem of Palestine, turning parts of the occupied land into a landfill for Israeli solid waste and other forms of garbage. How can such practices stop without international solidarity with the Palestinians? And in this context, a temper protest were organized over the past few days. To talk more about that, I have with me Mr. Eirik Skandret, chair of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign from the UK. You are most welcome, Mr. Eirik.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Eirik, there were some protests organized by pro-Palestine cause and Palestinian rights activists in Edinburgh. If you tell us about these protests, how they started, the message behind, and if there is a plan that they will continue for the days to come.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, in the past 2 days, there was protests against a dance company called LEV, which has a history of being part of the Brand Israel propaganda effort of the State of Israel. It has been performing in the Edinburgh International Festival, obviously a very major international cultural festival, but because of the cultural boycott of Israel, which Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign fully supports, we decided to protest outside the venue where the dance company was performing. Interestingly, we contacted the Edinburgh International Festival in advance and said, did they know about the links between the dance company and the State of Israel and the crimes that are being perpetrated by the State of Israel against the Palestinian people. And they claimed that the event, the performance, was not being funded by Israel and that the troupe had no connection with Israel. In fact, we know that for the past 5-10 years, that particular dance company, LEV, has been funded by Israeli consulates and Israeli embassies. It has its roots in Israel and has been part of the Brand Israel, the way that Israel seeks to promote itself as a democratic and cultural state, rather than a pariah state that breaches human rights, which is what we know is the truth. So we held the demonstration. There were only 2 performances on Sunday and yesterday, Monday. So we demonstrated on those 2 days, but we fully expect to continue the dialogue with the Edinburgh International Festival and ensure that this doesn't happen again, that Edinburgh International Festival does not end up inviting companies that are being used to propagate Israeli propaganda throughout the world.
Yes. Mr. Eirik, we know of the importance of the BDS movement around the world as one of the main features of the Palestinian struggle for freedom and justice. But at the same time, it's facing really many challenges, whether in the United States or in Europe, as some people try to criminalize its activities. How do you see the situation of the BDS in light of such a trend by some governments in the Western countries and
Yes.
even in the Orient.
Yes, I think that the reaction by Western states that are sympathetic to Israel is a demonstration that the BDS movement is effective. It's an effective, non-violent, international position where civil society all over the world is able to expose the states of the world who are willing to get into bed with Israel, to collude with Israel's crimes. But civil society is standing up to that by supporting BDS. Our own government in the UK has recently tabled a bill which would make legislation to the public bodies in the UK would be prevented from divesting from Israel, from even debating whether to divest from Israel or support in the support of BDS. It's a very hostile bill. It would actually have impacts on public bodies who want to divest in other ethical and politically important areas such as climate change or arms trade or whatever. It's very clear that the target is the BDS movement.
Yeah.
We're fighting it. The Palestine Solidarity movements in the UK are fighting it, and the Scottish Palestine Solidarity campaign is particularly fighting it within Scotland, and our own devolved government in Scotland, we know, is on our side with this. They have registered a legislative consent motion, which is a technical thing which will seek to prevent any legislation which prevents boycott of Israel to take place in Scotland.
Yeah.
So this is particularly aimed at public bodies, which is local authorities, which is universities, which makes schools, and even bodies in receipt of public funding may be affected by this. So it's a very dangerous piece of legislation, but what it does is exposes just how far the UK government is willing to go, prop up Israeli propaganda, and to try and hide the crimes of the State of Israel.
Yeah. And Mr. Arik, how do you see the momentum that the BDS movement has in the world in light of the current rightist extremist Israeli government, which is strengthening and entrenching its apartheid system in the occupied Palestinian territories?
Well, we know that the project of Zionist settler colonization well predates the current right-wing government.
Sure.
Perhaps what the current right-wing government is doing is being more explicit about that, and that has consequences, as we've seen in the pogroms, in the actions of the settlers, the violence of the settlers, and the attacks on Jenin and on various other parts of the West Bank. So the right-wing government has, in a sense, highlighted to the world what the Zionist project is actually all about, and one of the impacts of that is that the rest of the world is realizing that they need to do something, and civil society needs to do something. Ordinary people need to do something, because the states seem to be very reluctant to do that. It was very interesting, actually, when we were demonstrating outside the venue for this Israeli-supported dance company. The number of people ordinary people walking past, not particularly activists, but they were applauding us. They were putting their thumbs up. They were coming and speaking to us and saying, this is what we should be doing. We should be supporting the Palestinian people through boycotts. So I think that it has a lot of, BDS movement has a lot of support amongst ordinary people, certainly, and I'm speaking from Edinburgh in Scotland, but I think across the UK, despite the fact that at the government level, they are wanting to support the Israeli apartheid crimes.
Yeah, and such movement and such support for the Palestinians' right is really support for the people of Palestine, for the land and for the environment. And we all know of your book, The Environmental Nakba. In what way Israel is committing a Nakba against the Palestinian environment and the Palestinian ecosystem? If you tell us a little bit about that.
Certainly. My involvement with the Environmental Nakba publication is, it was published by Friends of the Earth International. I was invited to be part of an observer mission to Palestine in 2012. Friends of the Earth International wanted to have some people to investigate what was happening in the West Bank as a result of the Israeli colonization of the West Bank. And we were hosted by Pengon, the Friends of the Earth Palestine. And we observed and witnessed a number of areas where the Israeli occupation was actually damaging the environment, and not just damaging the environment, but using the damage of the environment as a means of ethnic cleansing, as a means of pursuing the Nakba, continuing the Nakba into the 21st century. So we documented this, and it was about the dumping of waste. It was about destroying trees. It was about sewage pollution on agricultural land. It was also about very cynical moves, such as the designation of nature reserves, which are being used then to expel Palestinians from those areas and provide access to the illegal settlers. Also industrial areas, industrial settlements that were polluting local environments, polluting the workers, causing damage to the workers. So we documented these environmental infringements of the Israeli occupation, but also we understood these as deliberate, as part of the project of settler colonization, or seeking to destroy Palestinian land, to expel the Palestinian people for the project of actually taking the land, taking the resources, which is the primary goal of the Zionist project, as we know.
Yeah, and Mr. Ike, what do you think of the people who say, or their opinions, that Palestine is no longer occupying the headlines of newspapers and media outlets in light of the current situation the whole world is living, in particular the Ukraine-Russian war, that most of the European countries, or all the European countries, are very much preoccupied with the Ukraine issue now. How do you think this affects the BDS and the supporters' spirits, the supporters of the Palestinian cause?
It is true that the media in the UK is dominated by the Russian occupation, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. Yeah. It still is the case that occasionally the situation in Palestine comes into the Western media, and also the situation within the state of Israel, between the battle between the Zionist camps, if you like, the Zionists, the right-wing Zionists, and the Zionists who want to have a kind of more moderate version of Zionism. So that civil war is reaching the Western media as well as the activities of the far right government. So Palestine and the state of Israel and the Israeli occupations does actually reach the Western media to some extent. We're also able as activists to draw parallels, to draw links, and to contrast. So, you know, the Russian settlement of eastern Ukraine, the Russian invasion and attacks on Ukraine, the way that Russia portrays Ukraine as terrorists and so on has a lot of parallels. Not obviously not the same thing, but it's a lot of parallels with the way that Israel occupies Palestine, has occupied Palestine for 75 years. and the way that Palestinians are portrayed as terrorists when they have the legitimate right to resist that occupation. So there are parallels which we are, as activists, are able to draw. That doesn't really get into the mainstream media, but it provides an opportunity for activists within the BDS movement to maintain their spirits, to maintain their activity, and to channel it in perhaps slightly new ways. There's always different opportunities that we have to respond to, given what the situation is like in the media in the West. And sometimes we create our own media and spread the word in other ways, of course, including the demonstrations on the street that you mentioned at the head of this program, where we were able to talk to people directly about the reasons why we're standing there and supporting the Palestinian people.
Yeah. And Mr. Eric, we know that the Western countries have been buying the Israeli narrative that Israel is a democracy, a developed country, while facing terrorism and all that narrative that we are all aware of. Do you think that the Western world is still buying this Israeli story the same way, like, for example, a decade or more before, or things are changing today?
The mainstream media is still buying that narrative.
Yeah.
I think in the recent past, one of the things about the election of the far right government, I think, is that the mainstream media in Britain certainly have started to slightly question their usual presentation of situations in Israel and Palestine. In the past, they would normally just take their story from an Israeli press release or from an Israeli press person or something like that. They would not question the Israeli narrative. They would just reproduce it. Yeah. I think with the far-right government in Israel, they are at least now starting to question it, and they're having to explain to their listeners and watchers a little bit more context. Now, it's still a long way to go before what we would say is actually explaining what the situation is in there, but it's forced them to at least question that. But you're absolutely right. By and large, the Israeli narrative, that they are a democracy, that they are being threatened by terrorists on all sides, etc., that still is provided with a lot of airtime in Britain, and it's something that we as activists have to constantly challenge.
Yeah, and my final question to you, Mr. Eric, as we are running out of time for our program, while you are watching the Palestinian situation from outside, from a Western perspective, seeing the Israeli occupation government building and expanding colonial settlements and giving the Israeli settlers a free hand to attack the Palestinians and Palestinian towns and properties. So where is the situation going? Where are we going as Palestinians living here from your own perspective, watching things from outside?
Right. As activists, we have to depend very much on activists within Palestine, and we maintain good contacts with activists in Palestine, activists involved in the popular struggle coordination committees, in the kind of grassroots resistance, the popular resistance, in the kind of anti-colonial NGOs. And we rely on people on the ground who are challenging the Israeli occupation very much in terms of to find out what's going on. And we have friends in kind of Bethlehem area, in Masafri Yatta, in the Jordan Valley, and in Ramallah, and so on, who we're in regular contact with. It does sound like the situation is getting even more difficult there, but from what we hear, the spirit of the resistance is strong, including as a project that we're involved in supporting Plant a Tree in Palestine, which the Stop the JNF campaign is part of, where we're in touch with farmers on the ground who continue to plant trees in the face of violence from settlers, in the face of settler destruction of their trees, they continue to go back and plant trees. And ordinary people in Britain raise relatively small amounts of money because in order to keep in touch with the farmers who are planting, as a means of resistance, as a means of samud, of preventing their being evicted from the land. So we know that life is difficult in Palestine. We know that there are murderous settlers. We know that some of these murderous settlers are now in government in Israel. But we also know that the resistance is strong. And there are many people in Palestine who continue to stand up and continue to tell us to do what we're doing in solidarity. So let's hope, inshallah, that our solidarity can contribute to the resistance that the Palestinians are mounting, and that Palestine will be free.
Eric Scanry, chair of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. It has been a great honor having you on our program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. And from you, Sam and Azal, have a nice time.